Warning. The following video contains spoilers for Penumbra, Overture and Penumbra, Black Plague. If you wish to play these games spoiler-free, viewer discretion is advised. The opinions expressed in this video are the official opinions of Cawthorne Communications Incorporated. Please enjoy the video.
Need to find a lost thing? A lost person, perhaps? Do you maybe need to get lost yourself? Then come on down to the Northern Greenland mines. We guarantee that you will find darkness, monsters, horrors, and best of all, no one will ever find you again. The Northern Greenland mines. Get lost. No, seriously, get lost.
Good evening, everyone. As always, I am Cawthorne, CEO of Cawthorne Communications Incorporated and host of the Cawthorne Communications Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Cawthorne Communications and the YouTube channel Calvin Cawthorne VTuber, which you are currently viewing. And today we're covering something very special. Maybe not to you, but to myself. Today we are reviewing the horror game series known as Penumbra. Why are we covering this series all in one? I hear you ask, with an air of befuddlement and ever so slight condescension? We're covering it because both all the games in the series are relatively short, and because this series is the first horror video game experience I ever played. The Penumbra series consists of 2 full games and 1 expansion. They are as follows. Penumbra Overture, the first game in the series, Penumbra Black Plague, the sequel, and there is Penumbra Requiem, which is a supposed expansion to the end of Black Plague. However, we will not be covering Requiem in this review because I have played it. It doesn't really add anything to the narrative of the first 2 games, which, as a big story guy, makes me treat it the same way I would a garnish ingredient when I cook food, which I often erroneously claim is French for optional ingredient. So, let's dive into this since the anticipation is killing me. So, Penumbra as a series is very definitely H.P. Lovecraft inspired, and it starts as such. Our protagonist is a physics professor at presumably Cambridge University. His name is Philip Buchanan, which is a name you'll only know of if you read the back of the box, because the name Philip is only ever mentioned once in Black Plague. At no other point is our protagonist referred to by his name. Anyway, Philip receives a letter from the father he had who disappeared and was presumed dead before he was ever born. And all it said was basically, I got a safety deposit box full of stuff. Burn it, and don't investigate further. And naturally, when given an order with absolutely no context from someone he's never heard from before, Philip decides to investigate further. But since this is a horror story, it's all downhill from here. So, the safety deposit box contains books and a bunch of papers, with the book being entirely indecipherable, even with the help of one of his university colleagues. The papers, however, point to somewhere in the largely uninhabited frozen wastes of northern Greenland. So, 1 year later, Philip books a flight to Greenland on a small enough flight to somehow make a safe landing on a strip of ice and immediately boards a chartered boat. Now, I can't help but question how much Philip is paid at his university, because he has enough money to have a private flight and charter a boat, but maybe he spent a year between the letter and taking the flight, saving up money, and never spending any money on anything else. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't eat. Anyway, that's where the gameplay starts. We're on a boat, and we're grabbing our stuff to walk out into the frozen wastes of scenic, holy shit, it's cold, Greenland during a blizzard. Naturally, he's not walking too long before hypothermia starts to set in, and he's desperate for shelter. A year of preparation, folks, and look where it got him. He finds a hatch, and in desperation, despite not knowing what's down there, breaks the ice off of it with a rock and climbs down. And the rickety ladder breaks, and he falls down there, stuck. So it seemed like he narrowly avoided death by hypothermia to only die starving to death in an abandoned mine. But Philip, as a physics professor with no training regarding caving, decides to brave the theoretical dangers of this weird tunnel he's found himself in. I mean, if it's highly likely he'll die anyway, he might as well see what's here, right? After all, at least this place has beef jerky! So, after opening another metal hatch that makes the sound of imminent danger, the game opens proper. You're free to explore these tunnels at your leisure. You find out this place used to be a mine that was converted into a bunker during one of the world wars. I don't remember which one off the top of my head. The dates in the game would probably have told me more had I been paying more attention to them. You are introduced to the stealth mechanics, and you go into one of the many areas open to you. You find notes, and regardless of which room you went into first, you find an encounter with the first real threat of the game upon leaving it. The infamous zombie dogs, which give you one hell of an intro to the overall mechanics of avoiding enemies that has stuck in all frictional games since, including both the Amnesia series and Soma. Anyway, after avoiding and/or killing the dog, we'll get back to that later, we eventually go through a series of steps and puzzles and narrowly avoid getting wolfed down by an undead beast, and we place a barrel of dynamite in a hole and blow the hole even deeper into the mine, and alerting everything within a 5-mile radius that we're here. In this newer, and shockingly more developed part of the mine, you come across a radio beeping SOS in Morse code and you pick up a handset. You find notes on how to turn on a generator to get past a big gate, and you start getting radio transmissions from a man who goes by Red. Red guides you through many perils, like more dogs, a spider-infested cave he sent you through to punish you, because he's a bit of an asshole like that, and a giant drill dozer, which, due to playing Deep Rock Galactic a lot, I internally refer to as Donera. All the while, you're finding out that this mine could be haunted or cursed, with cryptic references to something called the Turn Gate, which can be a helpful or evil spirit in Inuit mythology. And oddly, the mine seems to get more and more developed the deeper you go, which is the inverse of how it usually goes with mines, with the more developed areas typically being near the surface. You also start to learn pretty quickly that Red is more than a little loony. He refers to eating rats or other less pleasant things quite frequently. I mean, can't really blame him for that because food sources are presumably scarce when you're trapped underground and don't have access to beef jerky. He also often vacillates between being friendly and overly familiar and angry, and it's kind of implied to be from long isolation. It's not really hinted at how long he's been down here. When you reach Red, you don't really get to see him because he sealed himself up in an incinerator, pleading with you to turn it on and end his pain. He says he can't do it himself because it's against the rules, which actually is somewhat expounded upon later. Not in this game, but in the sequel. You get treated to Red's agonized scream as he burns to ashes because you have no choice but to turn on the incinerator, and you find a key leading deeper into the mines amongst the smoldering remains. You also find out where Red has been sleeping all this time, with the implication that he'd been trapped down here for many years, since he was just a teenager. Eventually, you go down the staircase and reach a hallway where you see a not quite human figure shuddering at the end of the hallway. And suddenly the lights go out and you get knocked out cold. And that's where Penumbra Overture leaves off. And we begin the sequel, Penumbra, Black Plague. So, after our run-in with the definitely a normal person who knocked us out, we wake up in an unspecified amount of time later in a dingy cell, lying on top of a very gross-looking mattress. For your own sanity, I'd recommend not dwelling too deeply on what diseases are on that mattress or how long you may have been sleeping on it. So, first order of business is to find your way out of the cell, because you have no idea how long it'll be until your captors come back. You find an old coin, press it into a makeshift screwdriver, and escape through the oddly spacious vents. And as you crawl on the vents, you find you're no longer in the mines. You're in some sort of research facility, and some sort of bizarre creatures are being dissected here. Eventually, you come across a laser gate that you have to find a way over, and you find your key and an odd tape recorder, which then causes the first enemy to appear, a twitchy, pale, pantsless zombie-looking thing, which you can only run away from and hide. And with that, you run away and find yourself in the abandoned cafeteria, which looks like it's been abandoned for a while, and the worst part is, there's no beef jerky in this game. This place is called The Shelter, a research base built by the bizarre Illuminati/cult-like organization called The Archaic, for the purpose of researching something they call the Turngate, which appears to be some sort of virus that has infected most, if not all of the people here. Speaking of, after you leave the cafeteria through the sewers, you begin to suddenly and violently hallucinate. All of it based on your experiences in the mines, except trippier. After a series of puzzles in this hallucination, as well as a chase sequence that I'm not even sure if you can die from, you awaken from this dream to still being in a sewer and a new voice in your head. Turns out, you're infected with the Turngate now too. But something didn't take, so now you got this asshole who calls himself Clarence being your voice, quote-unquote, guide, if you can call him that.
I don't know.
Why can't I hear their voices?
Ooh.
Well, thanks for the help. I'm having an existential nightmare, and you can't even say a word.
And he's about as abrasive as he sounds. And by that I mean he sounds like he actively shredded his vocal cords with a volatile combo of sandpaper and chain smoking. And he can't shut up, so emotional moments can have the proper punch. You also meet, I say this loosely, Dr. Amabel Swanson, one of the few survivors of the Turngate outbreak, who claims to have discovered a cure. So we have hope on just possibly being able to make it out of here alive. Spoilers, you don't. Anyway, you solve a ton of puzzles to progress further into the shelter. Not long after you exit the first major area of the game, you find the corpse of your father, seemingly dead by his own hand. His notes indicate he made contact with the Turngate hive mind and just couldn't go on after seeing things man was not meant to know. And of course, Clarence cannot help but open his metaphorical mouth.
Oh my God, he's dead. Quick, if he hasn't started to smell, give him the kiss of life.
Anyway, you progress further, getting closer and closer to Dr. Swanson, solving puzzles and discovering that Clarence can fuck with your perception of reality, and going through the kennels, spending the entire time thinking you're going to get attacked by dogs, until you reach Dr. Swanson's lab. And just when you open the door, an infected! And you're locked in the room with them. Oh look, a hydraulic lift. Well, when all you have is a hammer...
Oh!
Turns out, Clarence, the absolute shithead that he is, made you think Dr. Swanson wasn't infected so you'd kill her, mocking you the whole time after you did the deed. And now, if you didn't want Clarence gone before, you certainly do now, and our dear protagonist Philip heartily agrees. So, you loot Dr. Swanson research, like the cheater you knew in college, and gathered the ingredients to create the cure, and against all odds, it works. You purge that abrasive voice in your head.
What a pretty body. Mine.
But then you have to run away from it again because somehow it possesses a nearby charred corpse. And once you get out of the cure lab, Clarence gets killed, and the Turngate decides you're suddenly worth talking to. It runs you through a series of tests and talks about how its hive mind is superior to the puny humans, and how we invaded its space. This was the startling revelation.
This was the knowledge Howard couldn't bear.
I'm underwhelmed, to say the least. Anyway, the Turngate asks you to tell someone on the outside to destroy all evidence of the mine/shelter so the Turngate can rest in peace, and Philip takes this opportunity to instead tell an unspecified someone to bring in the big guns and destroy everything here, and then get smacked in the back of the head, presumably by an infected, though there is evidence to say that this might be a hallucination like the disappearing furniture right before this. And if you paid attention earlier, you'd also know that email isn't going anywhere because, due to emergency protocols, the shelter is a closed network, meaning no electronic communication can leave. Either way, the story leaves off with Philip likely dead, and Requiem, given its nature, does nothing to change that, which is why we are not discussing it here. And that's our whole story. Our protagonist dead and attempting to leave a message with portents of doom after an encounter with something unfathomably ancient. Classic story beats of cosmic horror. So, as I said earlier, this game was the first horror game I ever played, so I'll admit I may be a bit biased in my opinions. But I will do my best to be objective here. In any case, Penumbra's story follows typical trappings of an H.P. Lovecraft story. In fact, At the Mountains of Madness, and a short story it inspired called Who Goes There are very likely the inspiration for Penumbra's storyline. And like At the Mountains of Madness, our protagonist arrives on the scene after the tragedies that led to the situation in the mine. Are they still scary? Absolutely, but a lot of games, especially horror games, tend to have this problem. You're usually dealing with the messy aftermath of a huge catastrophe rather than being involved in the catastrophe itself. Very few horror games tend to put you in the driver's seat before it's all gone wrong. Now, part of this is to add to the mystery, and another part of it is because so often, a horror game protagonist isn't really part of the situation that happened. Philip, our protagonist, just wandered into an abandoned mine looking for his father, and the mine just happened to be filled with untold horrors. Much like how Isaac Clarke in Dead Space went to the Ishimura for what was supposed to be a routine repair job. He was not there when the necromorph outbreak happened. Now, I get this is part of making it easier for the player to immerse themselves, but sometimes I feel like the horror protagonist needs to have more of a stake in what's going on other than just getting out alive. In any case, now that my little rant is over, mystery is one of the key elements in horror, and Penumbra does it well. Yes, the monsters aren't exactly concealed, which is something I often say most horror films should also be good about doing, making your monster not obvious. But what we're facing in Penumbra is zombie dogs, giant worms, and giant spiders, at least in Overture. But what the game does well is that it doesn't explain why these creatures are here until Black Plague, thus preserving some of the mystery. The other problem is most, if not all, of the background storytelling is done via notes. That's where you find most of the explanations for what happened in the mines, and also most solutions to the puzzles that aren't imminently obvious. There's minimal dialogue other than urging you onward and summarizing objectives. In essence, the story isn't overly shallow and it's well told, but I feel some of the elements could have been explored a little bit more. But one thing I find especially interesting is that eventually, near the end of Black Plague, you learn that the things you'd been using as save points this whole time were actually what initially infected you with the Turngate, which means you have been slowly infecting yourself more and more as you have progressed through both games, which I think was a nice little twist, because you don't find it out until pretty close to the end of Black Plague. Another story complaint I have is Clarence in Black Plague. My god, was he annoying. Now don't get me wrong, I get we're supposed to hate them, but the problem is that they're constantly chiming in, and as a result, some moments lose a bit of their edge because it's kind of hard to focus on emotional moments like finding your dad's corpse or the death of Anvil Swanson when you're hearing that grating voice and thinking,
"Dear God, will this guy shut the fuck up?"
Then again, that very well may have been the point. The gameplay of Penumbra is enjoyable, but a little clunky. I mentioned the issue I have with the method of expedition earlier, but very often the notebook will outright state a puzzle solution. But then there's times where, if you're like me and get a bit scatterbrained, you will need to write things down somewhere in order to remember a solution. Most of these puzzles were involving chemicals. And there's almost no middle ground, and most of these puzzles involve your inventory items. The other kind of puzzle the game offers is physics puzzles. Penumbra and most other frictional games are built on an engine made to mimic real-world physics. And while it's fascinating, the control scheme often makes these puzzles feel clunky and a bit difficult to do. But, given the fact that this game was released in 2007, it's forgivable because at the time, this stuff was pretty revolutionary. This game also is one of those games that pioneered the sort of stealth gameplay that's now pretty common in horror games nowadays. But even between the first and second games, you can actually see it evolve. In Overture, the stealth elements were the intended manner of getting past enemies, but they made a mistake in implementing it, in that they gave you a weapon you can use to outright kill most of the enemies in the game. Once you get the ice pick, you can fight back. It takes a bit of practice to get the timing down, but you can dispose of any dogs you come across, and other than scripted encounters, you can kill pretty much any other enemy in the game except for rockworms. As I was saying, this dulls the horror somewhat, as it's hard to feel scared of the enemies that you can get rid of pretty easily once you get the hang of it. Eventually, I just started aggressively attacking anything that tried to attack me with an ice pick.
Okay, we have solved the dog problem.
I think it says something that they do not give you this option in Black Plague or any other subsequent frictional horror games. They learn. In Black Plague, the only option you have is either hide from the enemies or run for your life. And as a result, Black Plague does the horror just a touch better. Another thing I like is the subtle foreshadowing. For example, when it's revealed that one of the symptoms of Turngate infection is déjà vu, it then decides to make you experience that in the dialogue, and you don't catch it unless you're listening for it.
3 weeks ago, we tried to get out through the mines, but it didn't work the way we'd planned. I think one of the Inuit workers made it, but others were taken. Some panicked and got lost. I ran, and when I stopped, I was on my own. Oh, and another symptom is déjà vu. The only chance we have is a man called Howard. He said he'd found a solution to the virus. His vitals last registered in the library, but only members of the organisation have access.
What organization?
Few life signs in the residential quarter. You need to find a survivor and get through into the library. Oh, and look out for our medical guy, Richard Eminis. He was acting strangely when I last saw him.
He's probably dead.
What else don't you know? Let's see. Watch out for signs of infection.
Present and accounted for.
Did you say something? Look, the symptoms we know about are paranoia and oral distortion. Oh, and another symptom is déjà vu.
We heard that already. We heard the déjà vu already.
The other thing the game does well is its atmosphere. Compared to modern graphics, the visuals aren't great, but this was made in 2007. But once the main but one of the main mechanics is lighting. In order to hide from enemies, you need to extinguish your light sources, and most importantly, do not look at them, because if you look at an enemy while you're hidden, Philip will panic and give away your position, leading them to attack. And the atmosphere is also enhanced by the sound design. Most of the music in the game is ambient noise and silence, but when there's an enemy around, you'll start hearing music that is unique to each enemy type. For example, the theme that sounds when the dogs from Overture are around but not attacking is very primal sounding. It's just a drum beat with some psycho strings. The fun thing is, though, that they actually incorporated the dog's theme into the music for the kennels area of Black Plague, which, if you played Overture, will definitely put you on edge. Because at that point, because of that theme, you are expecting to be attacked by dogs, though it doesn't ever come. So, while this game isn't as well known as the Amnesia series or Soma, and admittedly, this game definitely shows its age, Penumbra laid the groundwork for what Amnesia would become. And if you're all familiar with those games, you will see things that would appear in them at a later date. So, Penumbra sits at an interesting spot for me. On one hand, this game holds a special place as the first horror game I ever played, and also being what really made me realize how much I love horror. However, I must also admit that Penumbra doesn't quite have the same appeal to it as later fictional games do. Interesting fact, Penumbra started as a tech demo for the physics engine that would be the foundation for most of the fictional horror library. Penumbra, Overture, and Black Plague are the same basic story of that tech demo expanded into 2 whole games. And in some ways, the series itself was proof you could make a full game from that idea, which would reach full fruition in Amnesia: The Dark Descent. But let's move on to the score. For story, I'll give Penumbra a 4 out of 5. It did an excellent job of not showing its full hand too early, and it progresses in a way that feels natural, even between the 2 games. My main gripe is that some of the emotional moments didn't get time to sit due to clearance, and very little exposition at all is given by the dialogue. For gameplay, I'll give the series a 3 out of 5. It's fun, the stealth gameplay works well, but sometimes the controls for manipulating objects for physics puzzles is a bit clunky, and I honestly think it's just because these were the first 2 games made with the engine, so it's more of a product of its time than anything else. For replayability, I'd give it a 2 out of 5. It's worth playing, but there's not really much to bring it back to it, unless you want to relive the experience. And it's a bit of a long game to just casually play. For length, I'd say it's a 5 out of 5. The story really wouldn't benefit from being longer. The only thing I'd say is I wish Clarence died sooner, because that was too long. Overall, Penumbra gets a 2.5 out of 5. It's definitely a game worth playing, but it's probably not a game I'll personally return to outside of nostalgic reasons. It's still a good game, but it will show its age. So, that's all for me this evening. I thank you all for watching. I have been Calvin Cawthorne, and at Corvid Communications, we won't leave you eating crow. Have a good night.